I made $62,000 a year, the most ordinary salary in America. Nobody writes a story about a paycheck like mine. I was never getting a promotion that changed everything. I was never starting a company or getting lucky once. And still, at 65, I had $2.6 million. Almost none of it came from that paycheck. Every 2 weeks, one number hit my account and never really moved. $1,900 after taxes, the same at 25 as at 60. But there was a second number, one that quietly climbed for 40 years. This is the story of the gap between those two numbers. I was 25 when the first real deposit landed. Before rent, before groceries, before anything, $1,000 left the account. It went into a brokerage account I opened in 11 minutes on my phone. I bought one boring index fund and never touched it again. Most of that money went straight into my company's 401k, enough to grab the full match, which was simply free money. The rest sat inside a Roth IRA growing tax-free for decades. I never checked the price. I just let it sit. 19% of everything I earned disappeared before I could spend it. To make that work, I drove a car with 100,000 miles on it. I kept a roommate 2 years longer than everyone I knew. Nobody applauded any of this. There was nothing to applaud. I was just a guy choosing to look poorer than my paycheck allowed. A year later, I had put in $12,000 total. The account said $12,393. $393 had appeared from nowhere I worked for. Not from overtime, not from a raise, just money working while I slept. It wouldn't even cover a flight home for the holidays. But it was the first dollar I ever earned without spending an hour of my life. Something quietly opened that most people walk straight past. At work, there was a man named Derek who made $91,000 to my 62. He told everyone about it the way some men talk about their bench press. He leased a German sedan with payments bigger than my rent. He had the watch, the view, the trips that showed up on everyone's feed. By every visible measure, Derek was winning and I clearly was not. What Derek didn't have was a second number climbing whether he worked or not. Derek had a salary. I had a salary and a quiet machine underneath it. I said nothing to him. There was nothing worth saying yet. 5 years in, at 30, the account read $71,593. I had contributed $60,000 of that with my own hands. $11,500 had come from somewhere I couldn't point to. 10 years in, at 35, the number crossed 173,000. I had put in 120,000 across a full decade. $53,000 of it I had genuinely never earned. The growth alone that year beat 4 months of my take-home pay. For a decade, I had been the engine pulling the number upward alone. Now there were 2 engines, and the second one never asked for a day off. I was still the same average guy at the same average desk. Then the market fell apart. Not a dip, a real collapse. In a matter of months, the account dropped by more than a third. The news kept using the word that always sells best: crisis. Men like Derek sold into the fear and turned paper losses permanent. I did the thing that felt insane, and somehow wasn't. I stopped opening the app and sending the same $1,000. I was buying shares while they were cheap, on purpose, without flinching. I let the number stay ugly for a while and simply looked away. The market did what it has done in every 20-year stretch of history. It came back, then it climbed higher than where it had fallen. The only people truly hurt were the ones who thought they were smart enough to flinch. At 15 years in, the account read $316,000. I had put in $180,000 of my own money. The other $137,000 had grown entirely on its own. Derek went through a divorce that year and traded the sedan for something cheaper. He mentioned once lightly that he didn't really have anything saved. He still made more money than me. He had every single year. Across 15 years, that gap added up to nearly $400,000. And somehow he had nothing, and I had $250,000. Neither of us said the quiet part out loud. Then, at 19 years in, something quietly shifted. The account read $474,250. I had contributed $228,000 across 19 years of paydays. The growth I never worked for had just crossed $246,000. For the first time, money I hadn't earned outweighed the money I had. I didn't get a raise or a promotion that week. A line was simply crossed silently on an ordinary Tuesday. From then on, the invisible engine did more of the lifting than I did. At 20 years in, the account crossed $500,000. $520,927 to be exact. A well-known retirement rule said that money alone could pay me $20,000 a year forever. $20,000 a year for doing absolutely nothing at all. It wasn't freedom yet, but I finally felt it, not just saw it on paper. The thing I built on the side was about to become the main thing. At 50, 25 years in, the number read 810,000. I had contributed 300,000 of my own money across a quarter century. $510,000 of growth had arrived without my help. That growth was now bigger than every paycheck contribution I had ever made, combined. I barely noticed the milestones by then, and that was the strangest part. The account once gained $50,000 in a single quarter. I found out by accident on a Sunday and went back to making coffee. The old flinch was gone, the tight jaw at every red light. I still packed my lunch most days, not because I had to anymore. The man who packed his lunch and the man with 800,000 had quietly become the same man. At 55, 30 years in, the account crossed $1 million. $1,219,971, and I told almost no one. There was no sentence that fit a moment like that. I had put in $360,000 across 30 years of paychecks. The other $860,000 had arrived entirely on its own. $1 million, built on an income that never once cracked the national median. Derek retired from the company that spring, or rather, he stopped working and started worrying. He was doing the math nobody wants to do at 63. I wasn't doing any math at all. The machine did it for me. At 60, 35 years in, the account read 1,801,000. I had contributed 420,000 total across my entire working life. $1,000 a month for 420 months without ever breaking the habit. Everything above that, 1.38 million, I had never earned at all. It simply compounded the way patient money always does. One flat month, the account gained 6 figures more than I once made in 2 years. The strangest part was how unremarkable it had started to feel. It had become normal, the way everything eventually becomes normal. A boring decision had compounded into the only decision that mattered. At 65, 40 years in, the number read 2,624,000. Here is the arithmetic of an entire working life, laid flat. I had contributed $480,000 of my own money. Spread so thin across 40 years, I never once felt rich putting it in. Everything else, over $2,100,000, was never mine to earn. It was simply time, doing the only thing time does to patient money. I didn't out-earn anyone in my life. I outlasted the urge to spend. That same retirement rule now said the account could pay me $105,000 a year, more than my salary ever was, forever, without selling a single share. Look at the whole arc at once, because it only makes sense from the end. At 25, I put in $12,000 and the universe added back 393. Almost an insult and somehow the beginning of everything. At 35, the growth alone had already passed $50,000 a year. At 44, the invisible money overtook the money from my own hands, permanently. At 65, I had $2.6 million, built on a salary that barely moved. The salary was always average. The salary was never the real variable. The real variable was the gap. The $1,000 I refused to spend. It held steady across 4 decades while everyone around me spent the difference. They called that spending living, and maybe for a while it was. Derek is somewhere right now telling a younger man how much he used to make. The number was always impressive. It bought the sedan, the view, the weekend trips, and then it was gone, because a salary is only a river. A river only matters by how much of it you divert before it reaches the sea. He earned more than me every single year of his life, and still he is afraid, and somehow I am not. The only real difference between us was a habit so quiet neither of us trusted it at 25. It is payday again. I turn 65 tomorrow. The deposit hits on a Friday, the same $1,900 it always was. The number that was never going to make me rich. Below it sits the other number, the one that moved for 40 years while the first one stood still. I look at them stacked there, the flat line and the curve. I understand now that I was never going to win on the first one. I was only ever going to win in the distance between them. The paycheck was never the story. The gap was always the story. Nobody applauded the $1,000 a month, not once, for 40 years. But the $1,000 a month is the only reason any of this happened. If you are 25 right now, the gap is still yours to build. The math doesn't care how ordinary your salary is. It only cares if you start. This is the part most people only understand when it's too late to use it. If this changed how you see your own paycheck, subscribe for more.